Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in the Gospel of Matthew, and we're going to begin chapter 5, which is going to be a very, very interesting study. We're starting, starting a little late today. That's it, I'm still working through some new um, um, programming that I'm setting up here. But anyway, Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to be studying now. Normally, this is called the beatitudes, which I think this is a completely different. I think it's a wrong category. I think it's a wrong designation here. One, nowhere does Jesus identify these as beatitudes or attitudes. That's the first thing. So the idea that the idea that what Jesus is trying to show us is kind of some kind of attitudes. Um, again, it's just not okay. All right, so I'm going to get there in a moment. Let me just tell you what this is, however, because the Beatitudes itself, it's really Jesus' standard of righteousness. And what this is going to be is his standard of righteousness, as opposed to, why does this keep coming up here? His standard of righteousness, as opposed to, let me straighten this out here because this is not here. I don't know why Facebook is doing this. Okay. But this, let me edit this here. Anyway, Jesus' standard of righteousness is, you know what, I'll do it later. I'm not going to worry about this here. All right. I'm reading on Facebook here, and some reason Facebook is putting up the wrong post here. I don't know why this is going through, but anyway, um, let's get to it. Let's bring up the scriptures here. Now, from a timeline, if you remember in chapter 4, Jesus begins his ministry and he picks he picks disciples. We see that he chooses 4 of his disciples. Matthew is not going to tell us the entirety of the disciples that he's going to pick. Okay, and so when this thing is bothering me here. All right. So let me read verse 1. It says, "And when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him." Now, if you remember, in going back to chapter 4, verse 25, when he says, "Large crowds followed him from Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond Jordan." Now, one of the things about this crowd, let's even go back a little further, and verse 24. Then, well, let me go back to verse 23. Then Jesus was going all over Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, excuse me, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. Then the news about him spread throughout Syria. So they brought to him all those who were afflicted, those suffering from various diseases and intense pains, the demon-possessed, the epileptics, and the paralytics, and he healed them, and then large crowds followed him from Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond Jordan. Now, this sets up, as we get into now, what is commonly referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. Now, what you need to understand is that Matthew takes a collection of books. I mean, of these sermons, and um, and he kind of puts them together. So chapters 5, and then 6 and 7 really are a collection of sermons. But as you look at it here, the crowds that are assembling, and one of the things that he is going to talk about is he's going to contrast. This is going to be very important. He's going to contrast his standard of righteousness, okay? His standard of righteousness versus what they have come to know, what they have learned from the Pharisees. We'll see that later. In fact, he's going to say that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. So now, when you look at that, all that they have been going through, all that they have been um, um, been taught from the hypocrites, the Pharisees, all that they've been taught, you have to understand now, Jesus is going to kind of really come against that. Now, if I want to make a comparison, and I will, if we put this in today's setting, okay? So if we put this in today's setting, okay, that the religions, and not just religions, I'm going to say Christianity, okay? Christianity. If we was to say today, Jesus is talking to us, he would be talking directly to Christianity. And just so we know this, Christianity, and a lot of people will say, well, the Christian religion is not a religion. You know, one of the popular phrases is, it's a relationship. Well, you see, the term religion basically is just an observance. A kind of, it is a common practice, religion, okay? And so you go to church every Sunday. That's an observance, a practice that you do. That's what it is. It's you can say a religious practice, but every day you go to church every Sunday. Every Sunday you do certain things every Sunday. Now, in your personal walk, you may pray a certain time a day. You might read the Bible a certain time a day. There are certain things that you may do every day or habitually. And basically, that's religion, things that you observe, okay? So when we say religion, yeah, Christianity is full-fledged a religion. Religion itself is not the problem, but the corruption that oftentimes forms because of your observance. Now, I want to set this up because whether we want to realize it or not, more than likely that your Christian religion is more religion than it is actual relationship with Jesus. Most Christian churches follow religious practices, standards of men. Okay? And this is why we're going to see that we have to understand the setup here that Jesus, why we have Matthew chapter 5. That most of what you see here, okay, that most of what you see is really what we think about in terms of Christian is we're taught certain thoughts. We call them sermons. We call them messages. When you compare them, and we're going to compare them to, now here's what Jesus actually thinks about, right? Then dot, dot, dot. Here's what Jesus actually thinks about. That he actually thinks that here's how we are to look at certain things. I'm going to jump ahead just for a moment. For example, we may think that the worship part, what we call, okay, the worship part of the service. See, we may think that's okay or acceptable to God. We're going to challenge that. We may say, in our worship service, where you play, 3 fast songs, 3 slow songs, and people close their eyes, people do a lot of things. We call that worship. But does God accept that worship? Now, you want to think about it. Does God accept that worship? Okay. Now, there are things, again, I'm trying to see how I can frame this so that I'm not intentionally going to, I am going to step on some toes, that's for sure. But I am going to step on some toes. But because, again, when you get challenged, one of the things that people will see is that when they get challenged, they are oftentimes people get insulted. Put it like this: I won't name names. That's what I'll do. I won't name any church names, so you won't be offended. But this will challenge what you think, or at least let me say, this should challenge to say, here's what Jesus actually think about my worship. Here's what Jesus thinks about me going to church every Sunday. And these days with certain churches, what does that even mean to go to church? What is it that we're actually doing? All right. Now, these crowds that assembled, they begin to follow Jesus because of the preaching, his teaching, his healing of the people. So now their expectations, their expectation from a Jewish perspective is, here is the Messiah. Now again, you also have to understand what's going to be challenging is Jesus is going to challenge the Pharisees and the Sadducees' religious hypocrisy. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were part of the Sanhedrin, which was a ruling body of Israel during this first century. Okay, so AD, right, 30, around AD 30 here. Rome ruled the world, literally the world. And then the Romans did not care when they would conquer a people. Oftentimes, they didn't too much care about their culture. And in the case here of Israel, they allowed them to have certain practices. They allowed the temple to be built. This temple here and during Jesus' time, which was the second temple. The first temple had been destroyed during Solomon's day. The only thing that the Romans demanded is that Rome had to be number one. Now, Rome installed as, the Sanhedrin, Rome installed them. And they also installed, from a political perspective or political kingdom or rulership, Herod. So Herod was the ruler. And then at this time, Herod with his 3 brothers were ruling. That's going to come into play later on with John the Baptist. Now, in fact, remember we mentioned that at this time, John had already been arrested. We'll get to him later. So when he says right here, again, the Pharisees, um, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were the most prominent of the group in the Sanhedrin. There are a couple of other groups. The Sadducees, and there's so much comparison into today's religious climate to even back then. You have today progressive and you have uh, conservative. So just like today we would call them Republicans, which are conservative, and then you could say you could Democrats, which are progressive or liberals. Well, yet this pretty much the same kind of atmosphere. The Sadducees were more progressive. They were the larger of the group. Another comparison, they were the larger of the group. And but the Pharisees were the conservative, okay? And they were the smaller of the group, but they were more pious. They considered themselves better on a higher moral ground. So again, the comparison just is it's gleaming here because just like today, conservatives think they're more on a higher ground than the progressive or liberals, and both really are of the same. Just like the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, they both were a part of the same evil political system. They were really dominated by Rome. Well, culture today, the conservatives and the Democrats, Republicans and Democrats, are just opposite sides of the same evil political coin. And then you have Christians who attach themselves to either. Okay, so as evidenced by the election, you have Christians who think that this was saying, well, God had mercy on our nation. Well, did he? Really? All right. The Pharisees had more power, more influence over the people. So you're going to find that Jesus will oppose them the most. And so up until this time, what you have is the mindset that is coming down. Let's kind of go back for a moment. It says when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountain, and after he sat, his disciples came to him. So these would be these crowds that came to him. And some of them came to him with a certain mentality, a certain kind of mindset. And what this Sermon on the Mount is going to do, as I said, Jesus never called this the Sermon on the Mount, and he never called these to beatitudes. Okay, religious men did that, by the way. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, again, you miss the point of what Jesus is doing here. So now what Jesus is going to do is give his standard for righteousness. They are used to the Pharisaical standard of righteousness, which is hypocrisy. And let me just tell you why it's hypocrisy. I'll give you one example. And Jesus is going to have this conflict throughout his ministry. But to show you really what kind of mindset the Pharisees have. That a woman who had a bent, she was bent over in her back. And Jesus healed her on the Sabbath day. The Pharisees stood up and said, there are 6 days in which you can be healed. Come on those days and be healed, but not on the Sabbath. See, that is the the mind of religion. Now, just think about that. That's the mind of religion right there. That the Pharisees would rather you follow what they are teaching as religious precepts. That they think God is more concerned about that. And in reality, they didn't really care either. Because Jesus says, do you not, if your ox fall in the ditch, will you not haul him out? Which requires a lot of work, right? You have to get people to get ropes and things like that to bring him out. That's work on the Sabbath. You would just leave the ox in the ditch and then wait till after the Sabbath to do that. Besides it being cruel, silly. But that's how they thought. That's how they thought. That was their mindset. That's the religious mindset, that you're more focused on what men teach and their tradition and their views or opinions than with God. So now Jesus is going to now straighten them out. Jesus is going to say, okay, if you want to be my disciple, your righteousness has to exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees. Okay, it has to. You won't enter the kingdom of heaven unless your righteousness exceeds theirs. And by the way, just keep in mind, there were Pharisees who were observing this in the crowd. So they knew he was talking about them. So he says, so he came to them, notice, then he began to teach them, saying, the poor in spirit are blessed. So let's define some terms right here. The word righteousness is right standing with God, or to be in right standing. Okay, he's getting ready to give us the standard of how to be in right standing with God. Now, the word bless here, or blessed, or blessing, means to be in a place of contentment or happiness. Now, sometimes if you look at the dictionary, and unfortunately, sometimes when people want to craft something, unfortunately they will um, unfortunately they will stretch things. So let me say this: the word blessed or blessing, it simply means to be in a state of happiness, a state of contentment. Okay, so I think if you look in Vine's dictionary, and when you see dictionaries, how they kind of define things, one of the kind of definitions will say to be empowered to prosper. Well, understand that the actual meaning, you could say that blessed or blessing is that you are in this state of contentment, this state of happiness, because of something that has happened. And of course, in the context of what we're teaching, the state of contentment or happiness comes because of what God has done for you, or what God has done to you. So now I'm in a state of happiness or contentment. So he's now getting ready to say, now, here is what, if you want true blessedness, it is. And it has nothing to do with money. People who are rich are not blessed because they have money. Although, yeah, you certainly can make the argument that if you have enough money, that certainly can put you in a state of happiness or contentment. However, Jesus, what he's getting ready to say, is going to start with the inside. Okay, that he's going to start inside. So what makes a person content or happiness is what's going to happen as a result. And put it like this: how does God make a person content or happiness? That is what Jesus is getting ready to pour out. And I'm going to pick this up in the next study because I am way out of time. So Listen, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective, or the Bible Perspective, as well as BP, um, the Bible in Views. But um, and as always, you can add a thought, a comment. All comments are welcome. All right, I will see you in the next study because I'm way over here.